everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are talking about my top 10 TBR for 2024. So these are my top priority books to read in 2024. I did pretty well actually reading my top 10 TBR from 2023, which I'm very excited about. It might be the only year that I actually got to every book on my TBR. And I attribute that in part to the fact that I kind of changed the way that I created that TBR. So I'm gonna try and do that again. In previous years, what I had done was use my top 10 TBR mostly to motivate myself to read things, which didn't always work. I also often would put my longest, chunkiest books on there, mostly like adult high fantasy, and mostly things that were like the beginning of a new series and things that I owned physically, so I was planning to read the physical books. All of this just made it much more difficult to actually get to everything on that list because everything was such a commitment to read, whether it was because of the length and density of the book or because it meant starting a new series or whatever it was. So last year what I tried doing was switching things up a little bit, making there be at least a little bit more variety in the books that I was putting on my TBR. So have a little bit more variety in the genres, so it wasn't only fantasy, a variety in the length of books, making sure that not every book on the list is the beginning of a new series, whether it is continuing a series or whether it is a standalone, and not treating this TBR as like something to motivate myself to read these books, but to tell you about the books that I already feel most excited about and motivated to read, which seems like it would be obvious, and yet that's not what I was doing before. So trying to follow in the footsteps of last year's TBR because I felt like it was very successful. So let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna start with the historical fiction books. I have three genres that I am putting on this TBR. I have historical fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi. So we're starting with the couple of historical fiction books that I have. The first one being Boda, Dreaming the Hound. Now, this is a chunky book. This book is, I think, over like 600 pages. But it is the third in the series and second to last, so it is a continuation of this series. This is about Boda, who was a warrior queen among the Iron Age Celts who led her people in rebellion against the Roman invasion of ancient Britain, or Iron Age Britain. So I've read the first two books in this series already. I have read kind of one a year so far, and so I'm only putting this third book actually on my TBR, but I'm kind of secretly hoping that I will also read the fourth book and just finish the series this year because I would like to read these closer together than one book a year. But if I only get to this one, that will be okay. But I have been liking this series. I really enjoyed the first book. I found the second book kind of disappointing because it just focused on things that I was not as interested in, a little too much on like the battles and not enough on the characters. However, based on where the second book left off, I'm feeling very optimistic about this third book because I think that it will be coming back around to focusing more on the characters, more on the kind of spiritual life of the people, which is also something I loved in the first book. And I think we're getting some new perspectives from characters that I'm very interested to read more from. My other historical fiction book is The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. This is another one where I'm just putting this first book on my TBR. I do really want to read the whole trilogy. If I like this first book, of course, I would love to binge this trilogy. But I don't know too much about the plot of this. This is one of those books where I read the plot a long time ago. I was like, this sounds great, and then immediately forgot like the details of the plot. But I kind of want to go into it with not knowing too much, not too many expectations. Most of what I know about this is that it takes place, I believe, in Pompeii, and that it is following women who have been forced to work in a brothel in Pompeii. That is all I have retained about the plot of this. But I just have heard such fantastic things about this, and I also have heard really great things from people who have just like wildly different tastes in books, which also makes me very intrigued by when people with such different reading taste can all just sing the praises of a single book or series. So this is actually one of my like top like priorities for the year. This is one of the things I am really the most excited to get to, and I really hope that I love this first book and we'll just binge through the trilogy. Next up, I have a historical fantasy to kind of bridge between our historical fiction and fantasy genres, which is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. In 2023, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I really enjoyed it, and I really want to read more from this author. Gods of Jade and Shadow is a book that I have been hearing great things about for a long time. I have been meaning to read for a long time, but now that I have read something from this author already, I feel much more motivated to finally get to this. So I really want to read something else from Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this kind of seems like the most logical next book to read from this author. Again, one that I don't know too much about. I have just heard so many great things about it over the years that I have retained bits and pieces. I think that it is set in Mexico City in the 1920s, and we're following our main character who somehow releases like a god of death, and then she has to go on some kind of quest with him to like help him do something. That's mostly all I know about it. The 1920s isn't necessarily a time period I'm particularly drawn to for historical fantasy, but I still think this one sounds really interesting, and I'm planning that I will probably listen to this as an audiobook actually, which will also, that was another thing that I'm trying to switch up to make sure that not every book on this list is physical books. I have a couple of audiobook plans in here. All right, next up is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. This has actually been on a previous top 10 list. I think this was on my 2022 top 10 TBR, and obviously did not get to it then, but it's coming back around. I'm gonna get to it this time. I think that part of why I never got to this before was because it actually sounded very similar to a Robin Hobb series, because I believe that this is about ships that are made out of dragon bones, and that they are like these sentient ships, and it's all like maritime fantasy. Maybe they're pirates, I don't totally know. But there are elements of it that sound very similar to a Robin Hobb series, and in 2022 I was finishing reading Robin Hobb, and so I think I just didn't feel up to reading anything that like was kind of similar, even though I'm sure this is like very distinctly its own. So I didn't get to it that year. I'm gonna try and get to it this year because I have just been very curious about this series for a very long time. I am interested in this author also because I think they just recently started a new series which looks like it is foresty, and so I'm very intrigued by that. But this one has been on my TBR for so long that I really want to get to this book before trying another series from this author. This is, again, the beginning of a series, and so if I like it, maybe I would try to binge the trilogy this year. We'll see, you know? We're committing to one book. Just committing to one book. Next up is Dagger Spell. This is another fantasy. This is also the beginning of a series, the beginning of a very long series, which could be exciting if I love it. And I think 2024 is the year that I can finally like test out a new long series to see if I want to get into it. This is a kind of Celtic inspired world that I often see Catherine Kerr kind of compared to a lot of other authors like Juliet Marillier or Robin McKinley. I think that her books are kind of like in that same sphere, kind of like lumped together with those same authors. So I've been very interested in this series for a long time. But this is also one that I may try as an audiobook. I actually did start reading it a little bit in the summer in 2023 and I got a little ways into it. I got about 60 pages in and I was liking it, but I kind of decided that I might like it more as an audiobook, so I might be listening to this one as well. Next up for fantasy is The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri. This is the second book in the Burning Kingdoms trilogy. The first one is called The Jasmine Throne and I read that a couple of years ago when it came out, and I liked The Jasmine Throne, but I wasn't like in love with it. However, it has a lot of elements of things that I feel like I will like. I think I just need to get a little bit further into it. I also have heard from a friend of mine who had similar feelings about the first book, that she loved the second book, and so that has just gotten me re-excited for reading the second book, and also because the third book I think is supposed to be coming out in 2024, so I am hoping to get to this one so that I can be excited about the third one and just finish out the trilogy. So I feel like I really want to love this series, and I liked the first one, so I'm hoping that this second one will just, you know, really catapult me into loving the series. And then my last fantasy on this TBR is kind of any book by Frances Harding. I read Unraveler by Frances Harding in 2023 and I really loved it, and I just really want to read more from this author and experience more of her worlds and magic, because it just feels like she's so creative and just interesting. So the specific book that I'm putting on this TBR is, I believe, called A Face Like Glass, because that's the one that I think sounds most interesting to me as kind of the next one to read. However, I will really, this is more of a placeholder for like anything by Frances Harding. If I read another book from her, I will check this off, but I think that A Face Like Glass is the next one that I'm going to be getting to. So those are all of the fantasy books, and now we can move on to sci-fi. I have 3 sci-fi books on this TBR, and I feel like these are ones that will be very easily accomplishable for me. 2 of them are novellas, and one of them is a book that I'm just planning to read anyway. So I feel like like sci-fi is not always the easiest genre for me to get into, but I am trying to read it more, and I think that these ones will be easily accomplishable. So the first one is Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. This is a sci-fi novella that is kind of an older sci-fi, and I have been meaning to get to it because as I have been trying to figure out what sci-fi I like, I have been trying to do some like research for recommendations for various, you know, tropes and subgenres and all of these things, and I feel like this book Solaris keeps showing up on different recommendation lists for all kinds of different like tropes or like sci-fi subgenres that I look up that I think I will like. And so I just feel like I have to read it to see if I do like it, because it keeps showing up on all of these recommendation lists for things that I think I will like. I think it does have an element that is exploring memory, which is something that I really enjoy, and I'm sure is one of the lists that one of the like things that I searched up lists for, and one of the ways that I found it. So I definitely want to get to this and find out if all of these recommendation lists are right, and will I actually like this book. The other sci-fi novella that I have is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot series. I feel like people have been recommending Murderbot in general and to me specifically for so long. People love this series. And before this, I just like never really felt like reading it because I wasn't that into sci-fi, but now I am getting more into sci-fi and I want to give it a shot. And I just have heard how much people love the main character and how funny it is, and it's a series of novellas. I think it has like 1 or 2 short books in it, but it's mostly novellas, so it seems like a pretty like easy in to a new sci-fi series. So I definitely want to at least give the first book in this series a try, and I'm hoping that I love it as much as everyone else has. And then the final sci-fi book on this TBR, which may be obvious if you've been watching my most recent videos, but it is The Last Hero by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is the final book in the First Sister trilogy. I read the first 2 books back to back in December and was obsessed with them, and they became some of my favorite books of the year. And so it may be no surprise that I am planning to finish that trilogy. This is also one of my like top most priorities for the year because I have been loving this series so much and I really want to finish out this trilogy. I want to read this pretty soon so that I don't forget things between books, and just because I'm like obsessed with this series and I just need to know what happens, and I love these characters and I need to, I don't know, see what happens to them. I hope they're okay, but I don't know if they will be. Some of these characters make some true sacrifices in these first 2 books, and so I just have to be prepared for this 3rd book to stress me out. But I am so excited to read this final installment in the trilogy. All right, so those are my top 10 books that I want to read in 2024. I would love to know what are some of your top priority books for the year. And thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.